Well, good morning, good evening, good day, good night, wherever you are on the planet, or not on the planet for that matter. Welcome. This is Spiritual Technologies 2.0, and we have Dr. Jeffrey Thompson with us this afternoon, where we are right now. And I'm in Southern Utah, and Dr. Jeff, you're in San Diego.
Yes.
And Javi, you're in Las Asturias in España. So those of us who have been in the field of brain entrainment technology have known about Dr. Jeffrey Thompson for years, but I want to read this bio that we have here just to give you an idea of who we're talking to and why you should listen carefully to what's going to proceed from this. So Dr. Jeffrey Thompson is the founder director of the Center for Neuroacoustic Research in Carlsbad, California, a research center which is actualizing its vision of healing the body, heart, mind, and spirit through the scientific application of sound. Dr. Thompson is considered one of the world's premier sound healing researchers, a brainwave entrainment expert, and high-tech personal transformation innovator, motivator, and futurist. He is a physician, musician, composer, inventor, educator, and author. His work addresses harmony between the body, mind, spirit, and is clinically proven to foster deep personal wellness and expansion of consciousness. Certified in multiple healthcare modalities, Dr. Thompson draws people nationally and internationally to his clinical practice and his cutting-edge auditory, kinesthetic, and visual therapeutic products and services. Dr. Thompson has been a pioneer in the field of therapeutic sound since the early 1980s, as mentioned above. See Medicine for the New Millennium. He is world-renowned for his clinically proven mind-body harmonious brainwave entrainment programs for sleep enhancement, physical, mental, and emotional healing, memory and healing, and other areas of personal growth through specific application of sound. He is considered to be a worldwide expert in the field of acoustic pacing frequencies incorporated into his compound musical soundtracks. A consummate musician and composer in his own right, he's established a method for using modulated sound pulses for changing states of consciousness for optimal mind-body healing and personal, frequently transformative growth. Dr. Thompson has worked with Deepak Chopra and has created many self-improvement tapes with Louise Hay and created sound programs for conferences with Bernie Siegel, Barbara Max Hubbard, Brew Joy, and Susan Jeffers. Wow. Well, welcome, Dr. Jeff.
Hi.
It is an honor. And you've been at this for a very long time, and probably right at the beginning of this whole psychoacoustic transformational technology, just when it began to get rolling. I like to ask people, how did you get into this? How did this take you from medicine into music, into transformational sounds? And what's the backstory here?
I started out as a musician and an artist. I went to art school. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. I went to art school in Boston in the 60s. So I was an artist in the 60s. Do the math. Well, anyway, the transformational for me was as part of a musician and artist exploring spirituality, Eastern religions. And when I graduated from art school, I had a job in a museum reproducing 18th century pewter tableware because I had done sculptures and I was an expert in mold making. And anyway, so I had a number of jobs. And then I went back to school when I was 29. I went to chiropractic school when I was 29 based on a number of my friends kind of pushing on me. And it was also, I have this funny relationship with the universe. I was starting a film production company. I was a filmmaker, and I was trying to decide whether I was going to do this, go off to Iowa to become a chiropractor or do this film production company. And I was talking myself out of going to Iowa because I have all this, a house with a bunch of stuff, and I didn't know how to get there, and I couldn't afford to go, and on and on and on. And so my house burned down and burned all my films and my cameras and my artwork and everything. And I didn't even have a toothbrush. The insurance money gave me just enough money to start out going to school, and I could travel light. So it was that's how I ended up going to chiropractic school. Actually, I'd never been to a chiropractor when I enrolled in chiropractic school. Figure that one out. But the reason
that's probably unique among
the reason I was going was because it was an extension of my spiritual search. That the human body is a textbook of universal law in microcosm. All of the esoteric studies show that, but I wanted to know what was the nth degree of scientific knowledge about this system that was my body. I wanted to know it from the inside out. And in the process, I got transformed and popped out the other end as a doctor, and realized that there was a practical application of this esoteric information that I was learning. When I got into practice, and I started making some serious money for the first time in my life. And you can tell when you're successful because the credit card companies want to be your friend. But I decided, I could do something that I've always wanted to do, and that is make an album as a musician, as a composer. And so I went and took out my first bank loan in 1981 and bought myself a modest recording studio with the latest cutting edge digital keyboard. At that time was FM synthesis, digital synthesis for the first time in history, called the Yamaha DX7. I still have that keyboard. And so I put it into my spare room. And before I started making any music, I remember my wife at the time asked me if I could work on her back. She had this back problem. So I popped open my portable table in the spare room where I usually do and put her on the table. But my spare room is now a recording studio with all this equipment and keyboards and recorders and mixing boards. And so now all of a sudden I'm looking, and I'm seeing somebody laying on this table surrounded by sound equipment. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if I could make a chiropractic adjustment with a sound wave. Each vertebra is a different shape, density, and mass, like a wine glass. I should be able to see if I can test out a frequency that would resonate, say, the fifth lumbar vertebra, and put it back with physical resonance. So I set that experiment up. It worked. It was easier than I thought. I started bringing it back into my clinic. The clinic that I had there was the largest holistic health center in Virginia. So we were doing every holistic therapy that you can get trained in under one roof. That was the idea. Let's test through every single body system we know to test through with a number of different techniques and fix everything we find, and people tend to get better. We had a very advanced stuff. We had the first laser acupuncture device in the US. We had a blood lab for doing blood studies for nutritional products. We had a full-time colon therapist. We had biomagnetic therapy. We were doing all kinds of different things. So it was a perfect atmosphere for me to start bringing in this sound work to see if I could make chiropractic adjustments with sound. And it was even better with cranial work, because the 26 bones of the skull that are all supposed to be moving and pumping the cerebrospinal fluid around, when those are stuck, many of them are very difficult to get to. You have to put your finger in a person's mouth in a gag area. You push on a very sensitive bone in a certain phase of respiration, very difficult stuff. But now I could target a specific cranial bone and make that bone float in resonance and disconnect from all the rest, because it's floating in state of motion. And the next big inhale and exhale would expand, contract, rotate all the cranial bones, and this one would seat itself. So it became an advanced way of using sound for cranial sacral work. Then I started, over the years, seeing if I could resonate an organ. I can resonate a vertebra and I can resonate a cranial bone. What about your liver, or what about your kidney, or what about, so I began exploring those realms. And I could see changes in the blood work. I could see changes in my, at that time I was using a kind of advanced kinesiology, muscle testing. I was using a Korean acupuncture system called Ryodorako, where you measure the electrical conductance of certain acupuncture points to get a measure of the balance of chi energy in the meridians, so you can see that change. We had EKG machines. We were doing all this kind of very, very cool stuff. So eventually, I realized if I can change organ function with the sound wave, what about the brain?
Yeah.
Because the brain is an organ, and what's the function of that organ? And when I started going down that road, I had one of these epiphanies. It was the big holistic picture epiphany. And
Dr. Jeff, what year was this about approximately?
That would have been 1982 or somewhere around there. The epiphany was that there's a biological organic intelligence that knows how to grow your body out of two cells and differentiate the tissues into everything you are and make it all run on automatic without you thinking about it. And that's happening right now. That part of each one of us, this biocomputer program that is on automatic mode, controlling everything, 100,000 things a second, biochemical, neurochemical, structure, organ function, gland function, chi energy, chakras, whatever it is being controlled and orchestrated and synchronized by one system. The system is spread throughout the system, but it's basically anatomically and physiologically, it's special organelles inside the hypothalamus in the center of your brain, which control the autonomic nervous system, which is that system I'm talking about. The autonomic nervous system, which means automatically functioning. The autonomic nervous system is the one that does this job, that's making it all work. Everything has to be hyper-synchronized. For instance, if I'm jogging, it means I have a rhythmic contraction of opposite muscle groups as my legs move and my arms move, and my respiration is timed to those contractions of my muscles. In other words, as I'm jogging, my feet are hitting the ground, and it's going thump, 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 and I'm taking a breath in for every 4 feet hitting the ground, and then a breath out for every 4 feet, and then it changes to one breath every 2 feet. Then it's one breath every 1 foot. And then I shift gears and I go back to one breath every 4 feet. I catch my second wind, so to speak. That means that my respiration and the contraction of my heart have to be perfectly synchronized with the action of the cells of my muscles reaching into the bloodstream for a handful of oxygen. When they reach into the bloodstream for a handful of oxygen, there better be a handful of oxygen there. And the only way that can happen is if my respiration and heart are synchronized together with the contraction of my muscles. And the autonomic nervous system is kind of handling that, and 1,000 other things at the same time. So I began to, so the revelation was the imbalances that you may experience in any body system, organs, glands, structure, cranials, meridians, chakras, whatever you can think of that's going on in my body that's participating in the synchronicity of making me alive, is controlled by this one system. And anything that starts to go on that creates a symptom that's a malfunctioning of any of those systems, it's not their fault. They're only doing what central command is telling them to do. There's never a time when the body, any part of the body functions autonomously separated from all the rest. Everybody is a group effort coordinated by the central command system of the autonomic nervous system. So in reality, spending time in the trenches with individual organs or acupuncture points or vertebra or cranial bones is missing the point, because the point is a program software error in the autonomic nervous system itself, in the biocomputer program that's supposed to be coordinating everybody. So with that in mind, I was thinking, okay, I'm already in my examination examining structure, cranial, meridians, organ function, biomagnetics. I'm already looking through all those different systems, finding all the imbalances I can find and fixing them all with a bunch of different methods. So in this case, I'm going to change that strategy. I'm going to test through all these systems, find out where all the imbalances are, but not fix them. I'm going to see if I can find a sound wave that will fix your fifth lumbar vertebra, and then see if that same sound will work for your ninth thoracic. Now, intuitively, you say, well, no, there's one frequency of the fifth lumbar and one for the ninth thoracic, and that is true. But there's another frequency that will fix both, and that's the frequency for the autonomic nervous system, because essentially the chiropractic misalignment of your spine is not in your spine at all. It's in your brain, because your brain is running a program that positions each vertebra in three-dimensional space to put the least amount of pressure on the spinal cord and nerve roots by contracting 5 layers of paraspinal muscles that attach to each vertebra. And by contracting those in a certain configuration, you can rotate every vertebra in any position you want. So when the brain is running the correct program, everybody's aligned, least amount of pressure on the spinal cord and nerve roots, and the communication network between the brain and the organs and the glands is a free-flowing exchange. For every percentage point of interference that's in that system, we have errors. In other words, I'm only receiving 97% of the signal from my liver, and I'm making a 3% error decision based on that and sending that signal out to the liver to tell it what to do, but 3% is getting lost in the transmission. So now we've got a 6% error, and the liver is malfunctioning. It's not its fault, because the network's got a problem and my brain has got a wrong program running. And so here's how I started. Let's find the frequency for the fifth lumbar and see if it works for the ninth thoracic. And if it almost works, but not quite, we can micro-tune the sound frequency until the ninth thoracic comes online. Then go back and recheck the fifth lumbar to see if this new tuning still works. Then let's add the third cervical. We might have to do some micro-tuning again. The keyboard I had, you could tune between any 2 notes by 100 steps with a digital readout. So you can get a 1 cent accuracy, of sharp or flat between 2 notes. And I can tune between C and C sharp by 100 steps with the digital readout. So then we want to go to a different system. We want to go to an organ or a gland or a meridian, and we want to find if the same tuning that worked for those 3 vertebrae works for a different system. We may have to micro-tune a little bit, but at some point, you've triangulated different systems together to find out a central tone that works for them all. And to me, what is that central tone resonating? The only thing that's common to them all is the autonomic nervous system, which is telling them all what to do. So that was my train of thought. And when I put that to the test and started seeing it working, in other words, once I've triangulated around and I found one frequency that makes the fifth lumbar, ninth thoracic, third cervical, the liver and the liver meridian and a couple of weak muscles get strong, then I start exposing a person therapeutically to that frequency. And all of those things get fixed, and I didn't have to spend any time on any one of those as a targeted therapy. Now, unless one of those systems got so out of balance that it became a primary problem all of its own because its tissue is broken down and it's become pathologic, then we're going to need extra rehab focused on that particular system. But it seemed a much more elegant solution to go to the source of the headwaters and fix it there instead of being down in the trenches piece by piece by piece by piece, trying to fix everything piecemeal, when the body is already designed to handle that from central command. So if central command's got this problem, then we've got this problem. That was my practice. At a certain point, this sound work was obviously becoming more powerful than everything else I was doing combined. And by definition, I was doing everything in this clinic. And I began to think, nobody else is doing this. this is completely new stuff. This is, I should be doing this full time. Why am I? But I'm very successful at this huge clinic, and so now I came to this tough decision. I came up against what I thought was my purpose staring me in my face. I thought my purpose was become a successful doctor and have a nice big clinic and help a lot of people. And that was true, but I stumbled on something much more elegant and powerful, and I needed to pursue that. And I couldn't pursue it in Virginia. It was too repressive there. I was already having to battle the state medical board with just a column I had in the paper every week discussing a different, health issues and a holistic approach to that. They didn't want to hear that. They didn't want that in the paper. They wanted me to fix back pain. So I finally made a decision that I was going to sell my practice and sell my house and move to California, the only place where they don't lock you up for these kind of crazy ideas. And so in 1988, I sold my practice, sold my house, and moved to California. And I set up a center in Solana Beach, which is North County, San Diego, in 1988. Backtracking a bit, to my little recording studio that I'd put together, I started working on my first album. And I put my first album out in 1986, called Isle of Skye. And my music now was becoming changed and transformed because of what I was seeing with patients using this physical resonance idea, resonating different parts of your body and resonating your brain with these sound waves. So that was where the brainwave entrainment part began. And the origins of that was work I was doing mostly with my female patients. My clinical practice has always been mostly kids and mostly women. Why, I don't know. I've always been good with it, so it tends to attract itself. With the women, I'd say more than half of all the female patients I had menstrual problems of some kind. Either you've got a very bad problem when you have your menstrual cycle, or you have an irregular menstrual cycle. And the irregular menstrual cycle is a problem with the pineal gland, a little gland in the center of your brain that's sensitive to light-dark cycles and participates in governing my body clocks, my bio clocks. In addition, there was seasonal affective disorder. I'd read some articles about medical treatments for that using full spectrum daylight bulbs. Exposing a person to a full spectrum daylight bulb for 1 hour a day would reset the bio clock so that my body thermostat was set for the correct season. So I was taking that information and trying it out with my female patients. So I was figuring that if the pineal gland that governs my ovulation cycle, which should be every 28 and a half days, timed with the full moon, new moon cycle. That's the light pulse that the pineal gland is sensitive to, timing my bioclocks to. If it's out of step, then it's just like a high school marching band. If one guy is out of step in the marching band, you'll take a couple of quick steps to get back in step, or you'll take an extra long step to get back in step. And that's a couple of periods a month, or skip a month of your period. It's the same thing. The body's trying to get back in step with the moon phase, and it's unsuccessful. So I decided let's have them burn a little tiny light bulb over by the window in their bedroom during the 2 weeks of the new moon when there's no moon out, fooling the pineal gland into thinking that the full moon is still shining through the window and it's extended. The same way that you're doing with the seasonal affective disorders with the full spectrum daylight. And that worked with about 40% of the patients. We could fix them just by doing that. It'd take about 3 months. The period would get a little weird, and then bang, it's back in step. So with that in mind, with the idea of this, of the power of the bio clock, my biological clocks time everything in my body according to dancing with what's happening in the universe. with light pulses, electromagnetic field pulses, vibrational pulses of tectonic plates. All kinds of different things are going on that my body is timing itself to. Why it's doing it is because it saves energy to do so. And this is an ecological system par excellence. In the case of a body saving energy, it's saving life energy. So it's very important because the body's pretty much got only two rules that I can see. Rule number one, survive at all costs. Rule number two, do no self-harm unless it breaks rule number one. In other words, if I'm caught in a trap, I have permission to gnaw my foot off, do self-harm in order to obey rule number one of survive at all costs. So that means that if I'm not conserving life energy in the best way that I can figure out how, I'm breaking rule number two and threatening rule number one. I'm doing self-harm if I allow my life energy to waste. So this dance with the universe, with my bioclocks, is to save energy. It saves energy to dance to a drum beat that's already beating instead of to invent your own. So I began to explore the idea of changing states of consciousness to the kind of states that we were seeing with EEG research with meditators and yogis and swamis who could go into enlightenment states and high states of meditation, or creativity, or peak performance, or the flow state, or memory and learning, all those kind of ideas. I could see research that showed EEG pictures of desirable states. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, if I was to create an external sound pulse that would pulse at a brainwave speed, could I commandeer the brainwave's bioclocks to time themselves to this external sound pulse? I mean, it could be an electromagnetic pulse, it could be a light pulse, it could be any kind of a pulse, but I'm using sound. So I set that experiment up, and how I did it was because I was composing music. I wanted to build it into my music. I came up with a way of a frequency modulation by modulating the amplitude or modulating the pitch. In other words, I'd take some sound in there and modulate the amplitude. So the amplitude would get slightly louder and louder and softer at, let's say, 5 times a second. Like a 5 hertz amplitude modulation.
Okay.
And that would be my drum beat. So I saw that work. I could see that starting to work. So I built that into my first soundtrack. I transformed my first soundtrack that I made and put on the market. I came up with another method that was a little more elegant than that because I didn't want to be able to hear these pulses so much. So what I did was I created a binaural beat. And if you're a musician, you already know this principle. If you don't know it scientifically, you know it intuitively. How you tune a piano is you hit a tuning fork of middle A, 440 cycles per second, and you tune up the A string to match that. And as the A string is getting close in tune, you'll hear the beat. You'll hear the binaural beat between those two. And you're trying to get the binaural beat to disappear because when it's gone, they're exactly in tune. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to tune all the A strings to that one A string, and then you're going to go off to the other strings. But a world-class piano tuner will, if you tune those two strings dead flat to each other, the sound is flat. The sound stays inside the piano box and doesn't come out. So world-class piano tuners back off the tuning ever so slightly. So there's this slow rolling pulse that pulls the music right out into the room. The sound comes right out of the box, and it seems to be everywhere. So with that kind of in mind, I've kind of tried to pick this apart in retrospect because at the time it was happening, you're in another state when this is happening. Mm-hmm. You don't really know where this information is coming from. All you know is that the small you gets out of the way and something else happens, So The upshot with this is that I had these brain entrainment frequencies built into the instrument sounds themselves on the soundtrack by untuning the harmonics within the instrument sound, because I was making my own instrument sounds. I was
How far off would you to hit this optimal place of resonance? Would you untune the notes?
Well, if you take the harmonic, if you take a cello string and you scope it in your recording studio, you can see that there's 1,000 harmonics in there, and there's large spike harmonics, and then there's small little tiny ones down in the crevices. And the major ones are the high amplitude ones. And if you look at what the frequency of each of them are, they're all octaves or harmonic third, fifth, seventh, ninth, 13th of the fundamental tone. And if you can go to a couple of those and you can untune them from each other, you create a binaural beat within the cello sound, right? So now you've got the cello with a tremolo, a modulated tremolo. And if you do it in the stereo field, you've got binaural beats. And so now the modulation is something that's moving in the stereo space. It's not just over here, it's moving. And that is a very cool sound. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with how it was transforming the soundtrack by having these binaural beats on the right and left, creating a phantom modulation that really actually wasn't there. It was air molecules colliding together. So I put that album out in 1986. Shortly after that, there was an article that I came across in Scientific American from 1973. And I can't remember how I came across that. And I've tried to remember how I came across that. But I came across the idea there was this guy named Gerald Oster who was a researcher at Mount Sinai Hospital. He published an article in Scientific American in October 1973 called Auditory Beats in the Brain. And it was a revelation for me because he had done these experiments, but he had used sine waves. So because sine waves are a man-made tone with no harmonics, you can create a very pure tone and another pure tone and slightly out of tune them and create a very clear, powerful beat. And you can depend on the speed of that beat because there's no harmonic interactions. And in this article, he showed that, yes, you could hook a person up to an EEG machine. You could set this binaural beat to 5 hertz. And with X amount of time, the brain waves would change from wherever they are, and they would travel down and match this and stay matched to it. And if you sped the binaural beats up, the brain waves would follow. And if you slowed them down, the brain waves would follow. And that was called the frequency following response. How the binaural beats were made, where you have 100 hertz in one speaker, 105 in another speaker, and you have this 5 cycle a second modulation that you hear, this wah-wah sound. That is actually a phantom of the physics of acoustics. It's collisions of air molecules colliding together slightly out of phase. And then your brainwaves will time themselves to that. But his next innovation was what happens if you use headphones. So they just got this little picture of some guy with headphones on and 100 hertz here and 105 here, and you hear this 5 cycle a second pulse here, and then your brainwaves entrained to it. But where is that pulse coming from? Because there's no air molecule collision right between your ears, unless you're really stupid. And I know a few people like that, but you know. So no, this is beautiful. This is a pure quirk of neurological function. It's another survival tactic. And any time that you can commandeer a survival tactic that the body uses, you really have the system under your control, because this is the highest priority use of body energy is for survival. If you can commandeer that, you've got the system. So one of the survival techniques the body uses is the idea of 3-dimensionality of sound, 3D psychoacoustics. That the fact that I can tell that the sound is coming from my left at 45 degrees up and 20 degrees back behind me. How can I do that? How can I tell that the sound is in this specific position, right? And it's based on 3 different mechanisms that the brain uses to locate sounds in space. One is what's called early, middle, and late reflections of sound. In other words, sound is, say the sound is to the right. The sound waves are coming down and they're hitting my ear and creating a sonic shadow on this side. That's number one, the sonic shadow. The sound has to bounce off the world before it hits this ear. That means this ear hears the sound first. So the brain goes, hey, the sound must be that way. Must be coming from that way. Because this got it first, this got it a split second later. Then the sound, when it hits my body, bounces off the world and comes back, bounces off my body and bounces back, early, middle, and late reflections of sound. And that means when the sound comes in, it hits the tip of my ear first before it hits my head. And it hits my cheek before it hits my neck. That means the cheek is already bouncing off before it hits my neck. That means that the reflective pattern is carrying the shape of my body out into the world, right? Sonogram, right? And it's bouncing off the world and coming back with the shape of the world. And every reflection is building up an onion skin layer in the biocomputer processor of my autonomic nervous system. And it's building up an onion skin layer of the shape of my body in its environment. That's how I can tell if I'm in a closet or the Grand Canyon. Mm-hmm. Reflective patterns and things like that. So the third is the pinnae of the ear. So that right there, the folds in your ear are not an accident. It's the most sophisticated frequency analysis device ever invented. Because those folds in your ear, depending on what angle the sound is coming in to your ear, it's going to hit one of those folds, and the fold is going to shave off a very specific frequency that won't get through. It'll bounce off. And the brain says, hey, I've got a missing frequency here. That means that the final 5 degrees of accuracy of 3-dimensional positioning is achieved, because that last 5% is the frequency that gets shaved off, and my brain can tell precisely what angle the sound came from when it hit that fold. I mean, who does this stuff, right? It's just got, God comes to mind, but the word is too small.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And that's what my experience of going to chiropractic school was all about. Anatomy, physiology, myology, osteology, embryology, central nervous system anatomy, wiring diagram of the brain. Everything is that way. Everything was a revelation like that. If you're interested in computer science, study the brain. God did it first and did it better. If you're interested in structural engineering, study the skeletal system, worked out to the nth degree of perfection, on and on and on. The ear it's a more sensitive sense we've got. The eardrum is sensitive to being able to detect something striking the eardrum with less than the diameter of a nucleus of an atom. And how is that possible? How can it be so sensitive? Because you combine physiology with a working knowledge of physics itself. So in physics, first of all, we have to understand sound is a unique phenomenon in the universe. We've all seen the chart of the total electromagnetic spectrum of everything in the universe, right? Electromagnetic spectrum. Way up at the top end is cosmic rays. Way down at the bottom end is brain waves, by the way. And then as the frequencies get faster and faster, you're into radio waves and television waves and and microwaves, and then it's in color frequency, angstrom frequencies way up at the top, and then you keep going and it's hard X-rays and that kind of, There's only one thing that's not on that chart: sound. Sound is the only thing in the universe not on the electromagnetic spectrum chart where everything else is. Sound is a mechanical energy wave. It's not electromagnetic. It's pure energy. So if you strip the word away, strip the sound word away, you have energy moving through a medium. Air molecules, fluid molecules like water, solid molecules like a sounding board of a violin, or your bones. So that means that sound uses a medium, which that's why there's, quote, no sound in space. Actually, there's no sound transmission in space. The sound is there. And if I took a Steinway piano and I shot it into orbit around the Earth and banged on the keys, you could see the strings vibrating, but you wouldn't be able to hear it because there's no air molecules to transmit the sound waves from one place to the other. However, if you put your head on the piano, you would hear it through bone conduction of your skull, which is what Beethoven did when he went deaf and composed 3 symphonies. He saw the legs off his piano and put his head on the piano and heard his music through bone conduction in the skull. So it's also how I got space sounds from NASA, which is another story. But sounds from the planets, vibrating ions. The brainwave entrainment, Gerald Oster, where he's got the 2 binaural beats in headphones, and the survival mechanism of the brain jumping to a conclusion is a big survival mechanism. If I can jump to a conclusion before you, then you're breakfast. Right? Mm-hmm. So my brain is always wired to fill in the details and jump to a conclusion before I actually wait for the whole time, to complete itself out. If I can jump to a conclusion before that, I win. So it's why Wheel of Fortune works. Still on television with Vanna White, right? Because I buy a vowel and I fill in a space, and all of a sudden it jumps in my brain what the word is. That's that function. It's jumping to a conclusion function. So that's what we're forcing the brain to do when we have headphones on with 100 hertz here and 105 here. The left hemisphere listens to the right ear, and the right hemisphere the left ear. And therefore, each ear has got a separate frequency the other ear can't hear. And this is not something the body was ever designed for. There's never a time in ordinary existence, even back a million years ago, when our biological system would be exposed to a sound in the right ear and the left ear couldn't hear it. Right? It just doesn't happen. So that means that we've created a new, unique experience for the biological system that has no wiring to deal with. So that means that the brain hears this tone and this tone, and the brain knows that there should be a modulation there. How does the brain know that? How could the brain know the physics of acoustics? Right. And this is a larger spiritual question, because I'm not a visitor here. That part of me that knows how to grow my body out of 2 cells, a deeper part of that same system knows how to grow a planetary ecosystem that my body grows out of. Right? And that deeper into that system is a system that knows how to grow, a solar system that Earth biological system grew out of, my body grew out of, or a galactic system or a universal system. There's all of that information is down there somewhere. So that part is going, wait a second, if there's a sound here and a sound here slightly out of tune, there should be a modulation. So it jumps to a conclusion and it creates it.
It's the modulation.
The brain manufactures the modulation. It jumps to a conclusion it should be there. Therefore, it makes it be there, and the real thing never arrives because there's no air molecule collision. We just trick the brain into making the pulse out of nowhere and then entraining to it. So now we've got an active brainwave entrainment process in the brain, not a passive one. A passive one is listening to speakers where I get entrainment. An active one is forcing the hemispheres to synchronize all the electrical activity across the corpus callosum and get the 2 hemispheres to communicate electrically, to jump to a conclusion, compare notes, and manufacture this pulse and then entrain to it. Very powerful stuff. I mean, this is what you need if you have stroke. This is what you need if you have concussion or autism or any kind of neurological deficit like ADD and ADHD, where we have pathways of non-communication, or pathways of communication that got disrupted through, through accident, through birth trauma, through concussion or something, or a stroke. So so back in the article in 1973 in Scientific American by Gerald Oster, when he's talking about this headphone thing, his unexpected result was hemisphere synchronicity, synchronizing of the pathways across the corpus callosum and forcing the two hemispheres to synchronize up together in a completely new kind of format that rarely happens in the normal brain. Normally, this idea of synchronization of the hemispheres is only associated with the ecstatic states of consciousness, the eureka moment, the personal epiphany, orgasm, highly creative states where the answer drops into a solution to a problem. All very highly desirable states that we all want. States of yogis and swamis in high states of meditation like enlightenment, they all show a synchronicity of the hemispheres that's prolonged. Normally they come together, the idea drops in, then they come back apart and do their separate duties again. But when you've got these headphones on with these binaural beats going, you now have prolonged states of synchronicity of the hemispheres as long as you're forcing the brain to do this process. And that is a new phenomenon in our biological evolution. We have just made a profound change and jump-started an evolutionary process in brain communication that is not possible any other way. It's not possible. I mean, unless you meditate for 30 years, you can get those synchronized states, kind of states that make you feel really great and have senses of enlightenment, but they don't last for too long.
Right, they're not sustained. They're just
not sustained. Now we can sustain them for 30 minutes at a time. Yeah. And then if we do it every day, or if you do it periodically, regularly, you're in a gym for your brain. Because every time your brain does something, and it does it repetitively, it strengthens that part. That's how the body works, right? It's like going to a gym. You're working a muscle, except it's a synchronicity muscle. It's a synchronicity pathway muscle of the two hemispheres. And, we don't even know yet what that's going to do to us all who are listening to these soundtracks. I know that for my patients, I've been in practice for 35 years, so the trends that I see is shifting your ability to be original and to problem solve and to be creative. It's a new thing. If you're a creative person, then it's really something. If you're a writer or a musician or an artist, or it's something else. But anyway, I read this thing and I'm thinking, wow, he did the whole thing with sine waves. And then I heard about, as soon as I had transformed my music with these binaural beats, then I started, you know how it is, if you talk about a Volkswagen, every car you see is a Volkswagen. So here all of a sudden I'm getting all this information about who else is doing this work. And the first I came across was the Monroe Institute in Favre, Virginia. And of course, here I am in Virginia. I'm going, oh, this guy's also in Virginia. It's like, and he's using the Gerald Oster model with sine waves. If you're a musician, you know that sine waves are not the most pleasant thing to listen to because they're devoid of any harmonic content. They're just this tone. Used to be the emergency broadcast tone.
That's right.
It's a single tone on your television. And then they started adding two tones slightly out of in a disharmonic relationship out of tune to create this, But anyway, so I looked at his tapes that he had on the market, and he had nature sounds and music that were kind of tacked on top of the binaural beats in order to give you something that's nice to listen to, so that the binaural beats didn't drive you nuts. Listen to these.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, and then as time went on, I saw other people out there putting out binaural beat soundtracks and pretty much doing the same thing. The binaural beats themselves aren't so nice to listen to, so you put nature sounds on top to make it nice. Or you put music on top and you make it nice. And I didn't have that problem because I was building the binaural beats by untuning the harmonics within the instrument sounds on the soundtrack. So it's kind of an intimate part of the sound. So the upshot of that was, so now I'm in California, and I've opened up this clinic. And it wasn't just a clinic. I had a clinic and had a research lab, and I had a brain spa. I started a brain spa. And this was 1988 when the brain entrainment devices and the light and sound machines were first coming out, and they were on the cover of Time magazine, and it was a big buzz. And I figured a good way to kickstart using some of this money, this big bundle of money I had from selling my practice, my house, is to start a brain spa. And that would be a good moneymaker. And in the back, I could do patients and this other thing. And that was very successful because I was one of 10 brain spas in the country. It was 2 in LA, me in San Diego, 1 in New York, 1 in Chicago, 1 in Florida. I got a lot of press. I got newspaper, television. I was on interviews. It was just a parade of people came through all the time. It's the scientists working in their garage. And it really was a fascinating period of time. And the work I was doing with patients, I had another revelation. The revelation was, okay, I found this frequency that balances all the systems in your body. So I've cross-referenced back and forth, microtune, until I get one frequency that balances everything out. And the law of the physics of acoustics, has something called the law of octaves. So how I can tell what frequency to sing to make a wine glass vibrate. If I'm an opera singer and I want to make a wine glass vibrate, how do I tell what note to sing? I ping the glass, right? Ping, and it makes a sound. And that sound is this fundamental resonant frequency of that atomic shape and density and mass. And so if I sing that note, we build up this, what's called a coupled oscillator pair. And coupled oscillators is science behind this whole phenomenon. And once again, Scientific American's got a great article. It's the 1993 December issue of Scientific American, had an article called Coupled Oscillators and Biological Synchronization. It's the foundation underpinnings of why the wine glass vibrates when I sing the right note, and why I have this phenomenon of brainwave entrainment. How I can have biological clocks. The foundational scientific underpinning of everything the universe does. It's not just me that dances to the moon or the sun. It's rocks. It's planets. It's inanimate objects. It's quantum phenomenon. It's in the atoms. It's everywhere. It's in music. It's why if I hit middle A on a piano and I stop the A string, I hear all the other A strings vibrating. That's octave resonance. If I hit the A string on the piano and I stop all the A strings, I'll hear all the harmonic 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th strings vibrating. Harmonic resonance, right? It's how my body's put together. It's how the universe is put together. They predicted elements of the periodic table based on music theory, because the structure of the atoms, atom to atom to atom to atom in a string, follows perfectly music theory of harmonics. So you can predict the next ones. It's like amazing. This new epiphany happened. I've got a frequency that balances you out and gets you better. And according to the law of octaves, if I drop this frequency by 1 octave or 2 octaves or 3 octaves, or raise it up by 1 or 2 or 3, but doubling the frequency or cutting it in half, the wine glass still vibrates. So that means I could do it with your body. And there's another phenomenon, because because I was trained as a physician, vibration sense is separate from hearing. Is a completely separate mechanism. So if I was deaf, like Beethoven, I could still, quote, hear through vibration sense. which is basically my skin, largest sense organ I've got. 4 layers of nerve bundles in my skin, Meissner's corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles, and there's 4 of them. They're buried in different layers of the skin. They communicate to the posterior spinal cord in huge, giant tracts, 5 times larger transmission than any other sense we've got, to neurons in the brainstem. That's vibration sense. The vibration sensitivity of these 4 separate nerve bundles, each has its own range, but over all of them, the range is 0.3 to 500 hertz. That is vibration sense as far as my body is concerned. So anything that is 500 hertz down to 0.3, I feel it as a vibration sense. Between 20 hertz and 500 hertz, I both feel it and hear it because the 2 systems overlap. So since that time, I've used that specifically in my soundtracks to make sure that I have instrument sounds that are tuned specifically between 500 hertz and 20, so I can synchronize the temporal lobe hearing center and the vibrational sense brainstem. So those get synchronized because they're processing simultaneous information. And if the information is binaural beats, I create synchronicity of the temporal lobes through headphones and synchronicity of the brainstem neurons by processing the same information. Then I extended that into a patent that I just got a year ago, after 9 years of battling, by the way, of a
Congratulations.
of a split sound table device. So early on, back in 1988, I was looking for a delivery device for the low frequency vibrations into the body. So I came up with this sound table idea where I had big speakers built in. You're laying on top of upholstered speakers on a sounding board. And now we have a very highly efficient transmission method of low frequency vibrations directly into the skin. And the reason it's highly effective is because sound travels through water 5 times better than it does through air. And sound travels through a solid 5 times better than it does through water. And that's because the molecules are more densely packed and they're more efficient in the transmission. So since the human body is 70% water and 30% minerals, bone structure, perfect medium for transmitting sound. Laying on top of these big speakers, we have sounds specifically between 500 hertz and 20. We have a very effective way of loading up every cell in your body with vibration frequencies. So it was very important for me to make sure the sound table was a stereo configuration, right-left stereo configuration to match the headphones. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a neurological processing error.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of sound tables, sound chairs out there on the market. They're all done incorrectly as far as what I would need it for clinically, for a clinical response, because they're designed with one speaker. They're designed in stereo, but the left speaker is between your shoulder blades and the right speaker is down by your knees. Right, so the stereo orientation is top bottom, and the stereo orientation through your headphones is right left.
Right,
and that's the neurological mismatch of information processing with binaural beats, which are trying to do something to de-stress you and to synchronize your hemispheres.
So, Dr. Jeffrey, these sound tables are on the market now.
They're incorrectly designed because
no, but your particular version, I mean, is it, or you have that
it's right-left stereo separation. And so then I went one step further because there was transmission of vibrational frequencies across the sounding board from right to left. So I needed to cut the sounding board in half lengthwise. So I had 2 sounding boards. One sounding board under the right half of your body and one sounding board under the left half of your body, and have them not communicate. So I actually cut the table in 2 and upholstered it in half. So there's actually 2 tables.
So the vibrations are stopped.
They're stopped.
Yeah,
got
okay.
An inch gap between the right and left. So now what we've got is headphones for your body. headphones for your vibration sense system. That means that the right half of your body has got the 100 hertz and the left half has the 105 hertz, and it forces the neurons in the brainstem to cross over, synchronize up the right left halves, just like the temporal lobes are doing up here with the brain. That I developed a set of light glasses. Back in the 80s, I wrote some of the light flashes sequences for a few different light and sound device manufacturers. We all knew each other. We'd all been going to conferences together, and so the idea of the light and sound machine, where you've got the lights flashing, and the lights are flashing at a certain brainwave speed, which slows down over time in 25 preset sessions, wasn't going to work for me because each individual patient was completely unique and different. And I wanted the binaural beats that are driving your brain waves to be linked to the sound that's coming through the table. So the eureka I had, that if I tell you what it was according to the law of octaves, if I take the tone that balances your autonomic nervous system and all your systems, and I play it one octave lower, it still does that. It's still the same note. It's still A sharp plus 23 cents. It's still A sharp plus 23, whatever octave it is. It's still middle. It's still A on a piano, whichever one you hit, right? The frequency is just cut in half. It's still the same notation. So if I played all the lower, if I calculated all the lower octaves down to 20 hertz and played those through the sound table and played the full mix through the headphones, I'm activating hearing sense and vibration sense and synchronizing them up together. If the table's split, then the right left hemispheres are synchronized and the right left brainstem neurons are synchronized too. And then if the lights are driven by the sound and don't have their own separate little programs, if they're just acting like an oscilloscope, that the sound waves that you see on a computer screen are making the lights flash every time it peaks, then when your eyes are closed, what you're seeing, these fractal colored designs that you're seeing, are actually what you're hearing. You're seeing what you're hearing, what you're feeling. And now we're synchronized visual, auditory, and kinesthetic centers in the brain, the primary perceptual modes the brain uses. That's why you end up with populations of people that are either visual types or auditory types or kinesthetic types. And if you synchronize those all up and you put them in a gym and you exercise them up to the same level playing field, all of a sudden your physical body has a voice in your field again. Because most people are physically non-dominant. Right? You can overeat, you can eat the wrong food, you can drink Coke, you can do all this stuff. You never feel what it's doing to you because your physical body doesn't have a voice in your field. When you start exercising that up to the same level playing field as your vision and your hearing, all of a sudden you eat your next dessert and you get the shakes. You always got the shakes. You couldn't feel it before. But now you've got a feedback system that's telling you don't do that. It's different. It's a different system.
Does it also bring more awareness to mental processes, thought forms?
It changes everything. Mm-hmm. When your brain gets ambidextrous, then it's a whole new ballgame of creativity and problem solving and relationships, and your sphere of who is your friends changes to include kinesthetic types who you never met before. Right, the guy next door who goes jogging every day for 5 miles. You never talked to him before, right? It's like, but anyway, it's a different physical relationship to your own body. You feel your body, and now you feel other people's bodies. It changes your personal relationships, your intimate relationships change. Everything changes. Your brain processing is different. It's including another sense. If you're an artist that paints, you want to start sculpting. I don't know. Anyway, so this idea that that visual, auditory, and kinesthetic all need to be synchronized up together was an important aspect of what I started creating.